Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Heading into the national park system this summer? Going it alone, or have you booked a tour company? What do you think about how the Trump administration and Congress are treating the national parks and the National Park Service? Have you reported any park signs to Interior Secretary Doug Burgum that disparage Americans, dead or alive? This is Kurt Repenchuk, your host at the National Parks Traveler. As you can tell, there's a lot going on in the parks. Some good, some not so good, and some downright bad. It's a lot to digest, it's a lot to discuss. To help us gauge a sense of what's going on out there, our guest today is Leigh Barnes, President of the Americas at Intrepid Travel, an Australian-based tour company that has been leading trips around the world since 1989. Part of their cachet is keeping tour groups small, a dozen or so travelers along with the guides. The company also recently conducted a survey of Americans to get their sense of how politicians are treating the parks and the Park Service, and we'll discuss the results with Leigh after a short break.
Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Welcome to the Traveler, Leigh.
Thanks for having me, Kurt. Excellent intro. I should hire you to do more intros for me about Intrepid. Great summary there.
Well, I do freelance work on the side.
Oh, good man. I may have to be in touch.
So tell us a little bit about Intrepid. I mean, I went to the website. I saw that it dates back to 1989, and you kind of roam the world, right?
That's right. We're the world's largest adventure tour operator. So we travel to over 100 different countries. And we have itineraries that cover everything from hiking to Everest Base Camp, food and culture tour of Vietnam, seeing the gorillas in Rwanda or Uganda, or visiting the national parks here in the USA. We've been around for, as you say, 35 years, and we have a really big focus on two key components. One is sustainability. We really believe to have a healthy travel industry, we need a healthy planet, and we all need to be doing everything we can to ensure the health of our public spaces. And two is really focusing on experiences. We really want people to go, get out, experience the world, engage with cultures, meet with communities. And that's the core of the business for the last 35 years. And over the last couple of years, and hence why I've moved from Australia to the USA, I imagine everyone can hear my very thick Australian accent, so I do apologise for that off the bat. But I've moved over here to really lead the business here in the USA, and that's really to grow our brand with American consumers, but also to build out our portfolio of products here in the USA. We have 26 trips that visit national parks in the USA. We'll take about 5,000 customers into national parks over the course of the year. So a really big focus for me is to continue to grow the business here in the USA, both domestically and developing and creating product in the USA, but also getting more Americans to travel with Intrepid globally.
Now, I did a little research, and some of it might be outdated, some of it might be current. You offer three levels of tours, is it? Basic, original, and premium? What can you tell us about those, and why three different levels?
Yeah, there's actually four. We have basics, original, comfort, and premium. So premium's our newest range that we launched about 3 years ago. We have four different ranges, really, because we want travel to be for all, and we want to be as inclusive as possible. So one of the big brand mandates is inclusive travel, and when we set up, we wanted to make it easier for more people to get out and experience the world. So basics is exactly what it says on the tin. It's the most basic offering that we have that enables people to travel on a budget and do that as cheaply and with as much value as possible. And then premium, again, is exactly what that says, is it's a higher level of accommodation, a slower trip, a focus where if you want to stay in nicer accommodation, have a bit of a higher standard of trip, you're able to do that. So why we've strategically done that is to make more options for more different people. And we're seeing, I think, two things happen at the moment from a consumer point of view is more young people are biting at the value end. And then we're seeing just more and more, I suppose, that 50 plus generation purchasing more of our comfort and premium offerings.
Now, I'm just wondering, how does that work in the national park? I mean, if you go to Yosemite National Park, do you put people up in the housekeeping tents, or do you cut?
Yeah, most of our national parks are generally what we call our original product, and that's a classic style of travel. And there'll be a mix of accommodation depending on the particular trip. Some will be camping, some will be lodge based, and some will be accommodation just outside of the national parks, depending on the itinerary. So largely the majority of our national park product sits in that original space where it's a classic style Intrepid trip, and it's a mix of different types of accommodation. So there will be some camping, there will be some lodge base, and there will be some nicer accommodation, just depending on where you are in the USA.
When you say camping, do you mean small pup tent size tents or glamping tents?
No, well, again, depending on the trip. So if you're doing the John Muir Trail, you'll be taking, the tent on your back, and that'll be the largest part of, you're staying in a tent. Yeah, you're building it yourself. You're doing that. So majority will be the pop tents, and there will be some glamping on different trips and itineraries. But on those more aggressive hikes, not aggressive, the more challenging hikes, where you're out there, you will be carrying your own camping.
So you lead a tour on the John Muir Trail. Do you do the entire trail?
Not the entire trail, to the best of my knowledge. It's a brand new trip that we've just run. So we have our first departures running this summer. So yeah, I believe I could follow up. I probably don't have the right answer, Kurt. So this is the one where I might need to back over to the full trail. But yeah, I can get you that information.
Okay, no worries, no worries. I was just kind of curious, and I'm wondering. It's been a few years now, but the Park Service, for some reason, decided to let lodging concessionaires set their rates based on what the market will bear. Has that been tough for a company like yours to handle, or the travel companies in general? Because $600-700 a night is pretty stiff.
Yeah, look, accommodation in the USA, full stop, is probably one of the hardest parts of being a tour operator, Kurt. Compared to the places we travel all over the world, there is a more challenging accommodation set, particularly in the national parks. And that increase we've seen not only with hotels but across the whole supply chain in the USA for our trips is increasing and has been increasing alongside the cost of living crisis. So this has compounded that. The cost of the average USA trip has been growing faster than trips elsewhere that we have in our global portfolio. So it's not just the hotels, but the hotels do lead to more aggressive pricing. But across the whole portfolio in the USA, we've seen transport increases, food and bev, all across the board increase. So that component has led to a more higher pricing in the USA. But I suppose what we've seen is the coupling of actual traveling to the national parks. The fact that you're traveling domestically has been much more attainable as opposed to some international trips. So it balances itself out, but overall the hotel component and the overall cost of living increases have been a challenge.
Yeah, I bet. Also, a challenge might be the politics. Where are people going this year? I mean, I'm hearing that a number of U.S. states, including Hawaii, are experiencing a downturn in tourism so far this year. And obviously, the Canadians are mad at the Americans, because of tariffs in the 51st state, international travelers from across the pond or Asia might feel the same way. Any sense of what's going on?
Yeah, I'll unpack this and probably answer it 3 or 4 different ways, Kirk, because it's always more context and more nuanced than just yes or no. So we're seeing Americans travel outbound to Japan and Europe in record numbers. That continues to be true. Yeah, so more Americans traveling to Italy, to Spain, to different parts of Europe. The biggest change is I think now Japan is outside of London is the second biggest outbound tourism market for travelers, and we're seeing continued growth of more Americans traveling to Japan. And our top probably 5 destinations would compound of Japan, Europe, and then seeing good growth into Peru and Morocco. So Americans are still traveling. We're still seeing good growth into those destinations. What we're seeing is the impact of travel into the USA, and that's probably the biggest concern is there's less Australians, less Brits, less Europeans, less Canadians traveling to the USA than we've seen. And that drop has been quite drastic since mid-Feb, around, I suppose the particular dates there and that mid-Feb timeframe. Just to put you like we were seeing, really strong growth into the USA, upwards of 30% out of those key source markets. Since then, it's been down anywhere from 30 to 40% during that time frame. So we've seen less of those customers come through. Probably the only outlier, and we continue to see this, is older Australians continue to travel into the USA, and I think we're seeing that across both inbound tourism, particularly from the UK and Australia, is that 50 plus customer is still coming to the USA. I think there's a couple of reasons behind that. More cash, they're able to, it's been on their bucket list. They're wanting to get to the States, and they're probably not as stressed by the political climate. I think we're seeing a lot of younger people, that generation below, not traveling to the USA at the same scale. So still lots of outbound tourism, but I think we're starting to see the impacts, and it'll be an interesting summer to see what the tourism numbers end up like. I know I live in Seattle. They've spoken quite publicly around the reduction in Canadian tourists, and that's been quite clear when the Blue Jays have come into town and some of those aspects. So yeah, I think the biggest concern for America is just the value destruction of its tourism market and having less people coming to travel to the USA. And this is a trend we're not seeing in any of those markets that I've mentioned. Europe seeing net positive tourism, Australia seeing tourism growth. So I think that's going to be a challenge this summer in the USA once we see how many tourists do come into the country.
Do you think the recent softening of the dollar might help things rebound?
Look, I think that always helps wherever someone can see that value. I think generally what I think will help the most will be access to flights. The flights really, in the biggest precursor for any tourism generally is the cost of flights and how easy it is to get into a country and place. So I think we'll see a bigger reaction over the next couple of months from the airlines with some price reductions into the USA to try and stimulate demand. On top of that, if the dollar keeps dropping, that will give me more tourist dollar will go further. But I think it's the first, canary is to see what happens with the flights and the access there.
You mentioned travel to Europe seems to be going fairly strong. It seems that some in Europe don't like that. We've seen some protests. I can't remember if it was Italy or Spain, where last summer they were using squirt guns to squirt at tourists, and now they're getting a little bit more vocal. What's going on there?
Yeah, I think we saw it last year sort of just combust almost, and we saw those protests in some of those, Venice, Spain, Barcelona that you've spoken about. This year it's a lot more organised. We're seeing organised protests really trying to get attention at the policy level, the government level, to try and help navigate this issue. I think it's more complicated than people not wanting people there. They do want tourists coming to their country, but they want that money going to the local economies that need it to benefit from it. So I think there's a couple of components to unpack. I think these destinations aren't happy with tourists behaving badly. Yeah, so what's happening in behavior and how are you traveling and are you being respecting of culture? Two, they're not seeing the economic benefits that were promised. Yeah, and I think that is a really important component with any tourism and tourism companies is to ensure that you're getting money into the communities and businesses and local apparatuses that need it most because, we'll talk probably later on a little bit about the cuts in the national parks. But what happens when visitation drops is the actual businesses on the ground get hurt the most. Yeah, whether that's convenience stores, food, accommodation, they're the ones that hurt. And in Europe at the moment, we're seeing this historic tourism boom, but the communities and the people that live in those places aren't getting access to the funds from that. So I think what we'll see, and hopefully, is legislation and approaches around better tourism to ensure money can get into local economies. Two is tourists behaving better and having more respect. So trying to travel in small groups and be able to make that happen. But I do think we're going to see ongoing is more protests and more calls for policymakers, more calls for tourism companies to ensure that they're working with the communities to create a solution that helps them prosper as well.
Yeah, I'm curious, or maybe I just don't understand what a country's government can do, because when you go abroad, you're staying in local lodging, you're eating in local restaurants, your guests are buying local, tourism items. What can the governments do to bolster on top of that?
Yeah, I suppose it's multi-layered, Kurt. I don't think there's one answer here around it, but I think there's a number of different aspects. One is around what concessions and how they're partnering with the businesses. Yeah, like the big companies, like what tax breaks, what solutions, what access they're giving. So how can the governments and the policymakers partner with the big multinationals? Yeah, so I do think there's a role to play in partnership. So how they can work together to provide access. Two, there's again how those governments and destination management organization companies partner with different operators, not just saying us, but a whole range of different organizations there that are prioritizing small groups, that are prioritizing local businesses. There's also a big work, and I probably the elephant in the room that I didn't touch on is like access to housing. There is a piece there, and I think we've seen, particularly in the two places that we discussed at the start, Barcelona and Venice, and we're happening, more and more we're seeing in Australia too, in Byron Bay, is the access to affordable housing has really been drastically hit by some of those tourism components. So I think it's about how they provide solutions for it. So there's a number of other avenues, but I think it's one, through partnership, and then two, I think the pressing issue is around housing.
Yeah, I can relate to that here in Park City, Utah, where, as you're probably well aware, the ski industry is number one, and it really has driven up prices, real estate prices, affordable housing prices, and it has reached a crisis level in some areas.
Yeah. And Kurt, too, I probably just say, it's not just on the policymakers, it is on businesses, and them paying attention and creating ways to create a better tourism product. So your point is valid. I think these people are protesting to get attention of whoever's controlling their destiny. One aspect of the policymakers, but one aspect is also the travel companies, and how we can, create better tourism products. And that's on us as companies that travel to all these different places around the world.
Yeah, and Intrepid Travel promotes itself as a sustainable travel company, right? And I'm guessing part of that is your small groups, 12 to 24 travelers, as opposed to joining 1,000 or 1,500 of your best friends on a cruise ship, for instance. How else do you define sustainable travel?
Yeah, broad question there, Kurt. I think
in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, all right. The group sizes is super important, because it gets you access to local businesses. One of the most powerful drivers of tourism benefits is cash getting into local economies, and having those small groups really enable that. Two is having local expertise to be able to facilitate that, and make sure that you're able to go to these locally owned and operated businesses. Two is ensuring the community wants you there. So working with community to create different tourism products that preserve culture, that have economic empowerment, and partnering with communities to create different solutions. And then when there's issues in those communities, working with them on different non-for-profit solutions too. So donations and putting your money where your mouth is in those particular communities to help create that positive change. The second component is environment. As I've touched on a couple of times, we need a healthy planet to be able to have a tourism sector. We offset all of our trips and do a lot of carbon reduction across our whole business to ensure that they are as minimize our impact of our trips as possible, and then we create a lot of sustainable components using local transport, local solutions on the ground, so we're not flying where we don't have to, so trains, buses, etc. And we do a lot of work too around DEI. We really focus on First Nations tourism to ensure that when you go to a place, you're learning around from the First Nations and Indigenous cultures of that place. We do a lot of work to ensure that we're powering female empowerment, whether that's creating more female leaders and tour guides in the world, whether it's prioritizing female owned and operated businesses, or in our marketing that we're showing a diverse and inclusive view of the world of different types of travelers. So one, community engagement, ensuring that local aspects. Two, doing everything we can to reduce our impact and support environmental projects. And then three, what we need to do from a DEI point of view and prioritize women-led businesses or First Nations or Indigenous tourism projects.
Yeah, I'm wondering, some years ago, my wife and I went down to Belize for a vacation, and the resort that we stayed with hired locals to be their guides and whatnot. And I noticed that we were out birding with a guide that we spent several days with, and he had to stop by his home to pick up something on one of our outings. And where he lived, most of the homes were mud and thatch, and he had a nice stucco house with a nice metal roof. I guess that's one way to give back to the communities and help raise them up is by hiring the locals and paying them a decent wage.
Totally. I think the two biggest drivers of any travel experience is one is supporting the places you go. Yeah, like getting that money into those local businesses is going to be one of the most powerful components of travel and one of the best benefits of tourism. And I think we've probably shied away from that in some of the storytelling. The way to have an economic empowerment, paying local leaders, in going to local restaurants and staying in local accommodation. The second is the transformative change it has for you as well. Yeah, and that you're able to you go see, you interact, you're happier, you're healthier, you're more likely to advocate for the places you've been. So those two components in any holiday and any time you go somewhere different are so powerful and create such positive change. And, there's the tourism strength in supporting local businesses at all scales is a real positive story. And then also that transformative component for yourself. You're telling that story. Hopefully you had an amazing experience getting to see the birds. You saw what life was like there and you were able to go and advocate for it. So I think those two together are such an amazing story around the power of tourism that quite often at the moment seems to be removed for some of more of the negative headlines. But I'd love to see more people talking about that local empowerment and getting out and experiencing a trip and the transformative change it can have for you as a person.
So, Leigh, Intrepid recently conducted a survey to gauge public sentiment about national parks here in the United States. Why did you do that?
Yeah, couple of reasons. One, national parks are incredibly important to Intrepid. Since 2009, we've taken 20,000 people to national parks. We'll take 5,000 people away this year. We have over 200 guides going to national parks and have 60 staff. So it's an incredibly important part of our business. The second is it's something that our customers love and we get really strong feedback. We have really high trip scores, and those two things coming together mean it's really important for our business. The second component is the amount of change that we've seen come through the current legislation, latest administration. We've seen, around 1,500 jobs move from our national parks, proposed cuts of over $1 billion. So with those two key factors, we wanted to understand a bit more deeper what customers and what people in the USA were thinking and what their take was on the current state of the national parks. And for me, coming here from an Australian company, it's such an amazing part of America. These national parks are a jewel in the crown of the USA. I'm lucky enough to live in Washington. I have access to some amazing national parks here. And, for us, I keep touching on how important it is for our company to support these places. So all of that into that melting pot is, what was happening with these amazing assets and places and public lands in the USA. So we went out and we wanted to speak to Americans and find out what their take was. And spoiler alert, Kurt, Americans love their national parks.
Huh. Who knew?
Yeah. And it's maybe a hot button topic in the opposite way that, Americans, 75% of the, 2,000 US adults that we surveyed, 75% of those respondents opposed the budget cuts. 76% of those people are really concerned about the future of the national parks. And 72% fear that these political decisions are putting the parks at risk. So there is a large groundswell of people that are concerned about the health of the national parks. So there's opposition and support for the national parks. What gives me hope, what always gives me hope, is always the fact that people at times of crisis or need are going out and wanting and have appetite to travel. So 81% of people are willing and wanting to visit a US national park this year. 80% of those that were surveyed. So, negative and positive, I suppose, is like people want to support their national parks and they're willing to go out and experience and see the world. And I think, these national parks will outlive any administration. And we believe tourism has a responsibility to protect these places and communities. And that's being backed up by the American public.
I hope you're right, Leigh. And I'm a little cynical, mainly because I've been a professional journalist for many, many decades. What concerns me is that your survey is just the latest that shows overwhelming support for the national parks, that shows overwhelming support for properly funding the Park Service and the national parks, overwhelming support for let's keep our public lands in public hands, to borrow a phrase from Congress, Brian Zinke. And yet, Congress cuts funding from the national parks. The Trump administration is really wreaking havoc on the National Park Service and the national parks. And you mentioned it, cuts of 1,500 personnel at least. We're still waiting for another reduction in force coming down the pike. What can the tourism industry do to oppose these cuts? I mean, you say, taking people to the national parks shows the love for the national parks, but at the same time, the park staffs are already strained. They're taking people out of the backcountry who are monitoring resources, protecting resources in the backcountry, and putting them on the front lines. Is it now the time to visit national parks?
Well, lots of questions there, Kurt. Lots of questions there for me to unpack and work through, but they're all good and they're all right. I think we're seeing, I'll answer it in three ways. One, there is a disconnect and a continuing disconnect between what people want from their holidays and policy. Yeah, and we touched on that with the situation in Europe and over tourism. There is a clear disconnect from what people are wanting from their experiences and what's happening at a policy and government level. Yeah, I think we've seen that over the last week with the big, beautiful bill and the call for the national parks to be removed from that. For those who can't see, Kurt just rolled his eyes at the mention of that bill. But one point here is there is a disconnect. Yeah, and we're seeing that consumers and people are wanting their, the places that they can go and see the world and experience protected. But that's not happening at a policy level. And that is a real concern. So what can people do and what can companies do? People, what they can do is obviously go and visit. I know that there is concerns around what's going to happen this summer due to the staffing, but I still think there's a way to responsibly visit, go to the website, understand when you can travel with companies, do that responsibly. Because if you go out into nature, you're more likely to advocate for it. So from that, there's a personal component. I'd encourage people to pick up the phones, call their local representatives and make some noise. Yeah, so from a human one-to-one point of view, go and experience nature. And then from that, do some advocacy, call some people, pick up the phone. Your second point there is what can companies do, is that I would like to see more companies advocate for the protection of these spaces. Now, we're just one voice in many. I know that the USTOA, which is one of our governing bodies from the tour operator point of view, is doing what they can to lobby at a government level. What we can do as a company is to have conversations like these, Kurt, to put this on the agenda and put our money where our mouth is. We've put $50,000 to support the NPCA to help with their lobbying and what they're doing over the next couple of months and hopefully into the future. We've got discounts on all of our national parks at the moment to encourage people to travel with an operator and travel locally to make sure that's taking place. And we're advocating. We've launched a range of activism trips where people can go and travel to some of our national parks in the USA with local activists to learn more about the place and learn how they can develop a toolkit to communicate and support. And then we're also, sending more journalists into these places and influencers to try and, tell a positive story about these spaces. Now, that's just one company and it's not going to solve the world. But I think hopefully what we're seeing is a bit of a turning in awareness of this. Some of the policy is being altered. We're seeing more people speak about it. I think this summer will be a bit of a crucible. You'll see more people as they experience the national parks, the good and the bad components of it. But yeah, I think there's two key components. There's a separation of what people want and what we're seeing from policymakers. But then second of all is we're seeing what I'd encourage people to do is go and advocate, and I'd encourage companies to do that. Not perfect, Kurt. There's a lot of nuance in that, and I've probably used a blunt instrument to explain some of those points. But I think that's the best way I can to answer your question.
Yeah, I was wondering, how strong the industry is collectively to push back on what Congress is doing, or are there some out there who say, well, this is just business as usual in America? Or is there a serious concern that degrading the Park Service could lead to a degradation of national parks and erosion of visitor interest? Or maybe that's too strong of a statement.
Oh, look, I think we'll see this summer. I think for us, a real concern is scheduling and the maintenance of the trails. Like practically, I think that is a concern, and we'll hopefully we're going to be monitoring that and seeing what happens over the summer. But I think the appetite to go out into nature is going to be too strong. And, I think hopefully there is a balance and a fine line here, but by people voting with their feet and having high usage and visibly, promoting and advocating, that we will see positive change. But I think it's going to be a battle, Kurt. I don't think it's going to be a magic bullet. I think that people are going to, and like they have for generations, there's always been an environmental movement. There has always been areas that we all need to do better and advocate for and try and protect. That will not change. I think it needs more focus over the coming summer months and getting more companies and people to make noise about it and call their local representatives and have these conversations. They're not all going to be perfect too, and I think that's one of my messages here too. Too often, I think with sustainability, we try and reach for absolute perfection. Really encouraging people to go, protect, have conversations, make noise, engage, and we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah. One of the things that Intrepid has launched this summer is a new campaign, United by Nature. What is that about?
Yeah, well, off the back of the research we did in June, and also from people, from our staff, internal staff, is they wanted us to be taking more of a stance in around how we can protect our national parks. So we've called that campaign United by Nature, and it's effectively a series of actions that we've taken at Intrepid to do that. One, we've given all of our staff a day off to go off into a national park to go and enjoy nature, so just making it really fundamental for them. I touched on earlier, we've donated $50,000 to the MPCA. We've launched the activism trips, which are a range of trips that go to different national parks. So we've got one in Zion and the Grand Canyon. That's going to be led by advocate Alex Harras. We've also got another one there led by Wawa Guthuru. So that's trips where you've got an environmentalist or educator taking you on the trip to give you a toolkit around how you can advocate more positively while also having an amazing trip in one of the national parks. We've also got trips that we've launched in Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons, sorry. My Aussie accent almost took over and completely butchered that word. So that will be led by different environmentalists as well, doing the same thing. And we've also, as I said, been really advocating quite loudly and speaking to media about the current situation. We just sent a group of women to Zion influencers to help promote that destination. And we're doing the John Muir Trail as well with a group of journalists. So what it is a call to action to our customers to go out and get into nature. We want them to be going and experiencing the national parks in the USA. We're putting our money where our mouth is by supporting advocacy programs. And we've also reduced the cost of our trips in the USA by 20% for upcoming travel into this year. So it's really about just encouraging people to get out, experience the amazing wonder of the USA, and then from that, going out into nature, traveling responsibly, if they want to, advocate. And I think one of the most amazing things about once you're out in nature is it does compel you to speak up, to have conversations. So, yeah, United by Nature is really encouraging Americans to go out into nature, to unite with each other, have conversations, and champion some change.
Is there one park that stands above all others in terms of popularity with your customers?
Yeah, the Grand Canyon and Zion are by far the most popular. Yeah, that's the most popular trip that we have. With Alaska, the other part of the USA that's really popular, and then we've got a lot of interest in the John Muir Trail as we've just launched that, Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. So yeah, Zion and Grand Canyon. I think also too, just because of the Grand Canyon internationally is such an icon, and it's one of those places that people from Australia, Germany, UK, Japan want to go see.
Yeah, yeah. I've been a journalist, like I said, for over 4 decades now, maybe longer than that. I try not to think about that, but with the national parks, I'm always searching for that angle that hasn't been explored in writing about national parks. Does Intrepid find itself facing the same question? How can we lead a trip to a park? I mean, everybody goes to the same places. Can you approach it from a different angle?
Yeah, that's a question we ask ourselves at Intrepid all the time. And Curtis, one I wish more people would ask us actually, but a couple of ways we're always trying to unpack it. One is always trying to understand a better sense of that community and place. And that's always changing and evolving. But the way that we've always been able to do that is through those smaller groups giving us access to local businesses. And they're always developing. So local companies, local innovators, local entrepreneurs are always changing what's happening in a particular place. Two, and I think this is one area that I've done a lot of work in Australia, and there needs to be work done in the USA and Canada, is through the lens of our Indigenous peoples and our First Nations peoples. I think that they are such amazing stewards, leaders for the national parks and our environment, full stop. And by telling the story through their lenses is an incredibly powerful way to uncover a new destination. And I think also too, and what we're always trying to do is tell the stories of a place through the lens of the local community and not just as a tourist. And that changes and develops over time. But I think anything where you're able to, listen to what's happening on the ground in the country and tailor your products to that, it's going to give you a different story because, cities, places, they change. And the stories that come from those different areas of the world will be different. There's always different causes, different challenges, different art, different culture that's coming to light in a different place. So, yeah, I think quite privileged and lucky to travel all over the world, and I get to go to some of these places over and over again. And I think by trying to go through that lens and doing it from a local's point of view or a host perspective, really opens up different travel experiences. And I think the one that I've grown the most personally and learned a lot about different places in the world has been through Indigenous tourism and getting to understand the perspectives and culture. I've done that a lot through First Nations tourism in Australia. So, yeah, that's a question we're always asking and challenging ourselves. We're by no means perfect and don't get it right all the time. But I've spoken a lot during this conversation around local economies, local communities, local people. And that's the lens we try and look at it. And that's always changing and evolving.
In your position, I guess you have to go out and field test the product. I mean, do you have a favorite park?
Not as much as I would like to, Kurt. I wish I was able to travel more than I am able to. I've also got a little 2-year-old daughter as well, so my travel at the moment is not as immersive as it once was, Kurt. But at the moment, I'm here in Seattle. I'm going to pronunciate this incorrectly. I've been getting my American lessons, but Rainier. I was able to go there recently. Stunning. Getting to see the mountain on my drive to work is unlike anything else. And getting to just go to the national park a couple of weeks ago, and then I'm going to be this summer heading out to the Olympics. So I'm very Washington focused at the moment. And recently was out at Deception Point, which I think is a state park, actually, not a national park. And being from Australia, it's very different beaches, seems so much wilder. Oh my God, it was cold, much colder than I've experienced. So Yeah, my focus at the moment is going as local as possible.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. That's Leigh Barnes. He's president of the Americas for Intrepid Travel. Leigh, I appreciate you spending time with us today and talking shop, both the business side and the enjoyable side.
Thanks, Kurt. It was a pleasure. Good luck, and thanks for everything you're doing.
That's our show for this week. We hope you found it interesting. And as you explore the national park system this summer, let us know about your experience, both the good and the bad. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.